So my name is Hannu Rajaniemi, and I'm going to talk about the complex relationship between science fiction and scientific and technological progress. If you don't know me, I'll sort of introduce myself along the way in the talk, but briefly. I sometimes write science fiction. My day job is as CEO and co-founder of a clinical stage mRNA startup called Helix Nano. And there is actually a relationship even in my life between those two, and we'll get more into that in a second. Actually, the roots of progress and roots of science fiction are very deeply entwined, and I could give a whole other talk about science fiction's origins and how deep that connection goes. Just to give a couple of examples, we could go back to Johannes Kepler, who wrote arguably one of the first hard science fiction novels of all time, called Somnium, to popularize his ideas around orbital mechanics, or a name that has been mentioned already quite a few times in this conference, Francis Bacon, who wrote this utopian novel called The New Atlantis, about a very advanced civilization, which also does science in a very, very principled and organized way that then influenced the formation of the Royal Society. In fact, I almost called this talk 6 Degrees of Francis Bacon. But there is this common idea that comes up a lot. In fact, somebody just mentioned it just before the beginning of the talk, that sci-fi inspires or predicts real-life inventions. And there are some examples of this. Some of the more direct ones include Motorola's mobile phones being directly inspired by the communicators in Star Trek. Palmer Luckey has also mentioned Snow Crash as a direct implication for inspiration for Oculus Rift. The most fun one I was able to find was that Heinlein was one of the first people to imagine a waterbed in several of his stories. And in fact, the actual inventor of the waterbed had his patent application rejected because Heinlein's stories counted as prior art. But this is not an exhaustive list of examples, but really, I mean, there aren't that many very direct examples. There is a lot of sci-fi out there, and most of it really doesn't actually materialize in reality. And I actually want to go a little bit deeper about what the relationship between science fiction and progress actually is. And my argument is that the real power of science fiction is not about gadgets that come true, but it's about the mental models that we get from science fiction. And what the best science fiction really does is it doesn't predict the future, but it helps us understand its impact when it actually arrives. So it's like science fiction is this fissile material. It's inert on its own, but when it encounters the neutron of a real-life discovery, it ignites, and then that fire reveals the shape or at least the feeling of things to come. And that feeling can then often drive us to actually make those imagined futures real. So I've personally experienced this firsthand in a way that I'll share more about in a second. But I want to start with a historical example that is actually so striking that it could justify the existence of science fiction as a genre just on its own. And that's the story of how this one frustrated physicist, Leo Szilard, found a purpose in life, invented the chain reaction, and ended up changing the world as a result. So here's Leo Szilard around mid-1930s, and if you met him a few years earlier, in the early 1930s, you would not necessarily have pegged him as someone who's obviously destined for greatness. It was not that he was not brilliant. In fact, he was one of the so-called Martians, these Hungarian Jewish scientists who part of the circle that included also Eugene Wigner and John von Neumann and many other people who went on to win Nobel Prizes. And he wrote a really powerful PhD thesis around resolving the paradox of Maxwell's demon in a way that actually laid the groundwork for information theory later. And this is kind of characteristic of Szilard's work. He comes up with the kernel of something absolutely brilliant and forward-looking, but doesn't quite follow through with it himself. And immediately after that brilliant thesis, he pivoted to making refrigerators. And this was with no less a collaborator than Albert Einstein, who was Szilard's friend and mentor. They read an article about a housewife dying from toxic fumes from a refrigerator and decided they could do better. And Szilard really put quite a lot of effort into this project. And it seems like his motivation was actually to get to financial independence. He was this very contrarian, independent-minded thinker who didn't fit well in academic institutions, so he wanted to get to a place where he could do just independent research. And turned out this refrigerator design, although technically brilliant, was far too noisy to be practical, and nobody actually wanted to take it forward. And Szilard just kept having more ideas. He proposed an early design for an electron microscope, and he tried to start a political movement modeled after H.G. Wells's open conspiracy of scientists to shape the destiny of the world. And he had this circle of friends like Einstein who kept supporting him and kind of prodding him to do something really more seriously, but nothing really came together. And then by 1932, Szilard was living out of a suitcase or two suitcases in England. He fled Berlin with the rise of Nazism, and he only had about a year's savings and no clear plan what to do next. And he tried to keep himself busy by creating an organization to help some other scholars escape Nazi Germany. But from his letters, it's pretty clear that he's in a bad place. He doesn't really know what he wants to do. He's thinking about switching fields from physics to biology. He has this kind of on and off girlfriend who, or sometimes, or his former secretary who's gone to India, so he thinks about following her. And Einstein and Wigner and his friends get pretty worried. Like what is Szilard doing? Where is he going to end up? And the world, of course, is around him is slowly lurching towards war. And as I've sort of been reading Szilard's letters and writings from that era, I really found myself sympathizing with him a lot, and in this kind of moment of confusion and losing connections and friends to the life he had been building in Berlin. Because in a way, I've been there too. So my original field was physics. I did a PhD in string theory. And I also got, during my PhD, distracted pretty easily. I did student drama. I wrote some science fiction. Now, I was certainly not I was not brilliant. I was certainly not in the way that Szilard was. I remember my advisor making this comment that, I enjoyed these novels you wrote, but your PhD thesis was best described as mediocre. So, not the foundations of information theory. And like Szilard, so Szilard at some point also did scientific consulting to try to retain his independence. I did the same. I started a previous company to do exactly that with another recovering string theorist. And we tried to solve a bunch of math problems for industry, built a team to do that, and it was fun, but didn't work out. There was a CEO we brought on, and together with her husband, they essentially did a hostile takeover of the company. And my co-founder and I walked away with nothing after about 6 years of work. And around the same time, my mom's health started to decline. She had metastatic breast cancer, and her fight against it was not going well. So I was also kind of feeling pretty powerless and at a loss what to do next. And I also tried to do a bunch of different things. I took up CrossFit. I tried to build a thought-controlled choose-your-own-adventure, and I did also read and write a lot of science fiction. And so you may have read my book, The Quantum Thief, and its sequels, and which are very much part of this bigger science fictional lineage that we could trace back to maybe earlier, but like one touchstone certainly is Vernor Vinge, who coined the term singularity, whose essay, The Coming Technological Singularity, is still absolutely essential reading that anticipates nearly all of today's AI safety debate. And what Vinge wrote about was things like minds becoming digital, superhuman intelligence is emerging, the world changing faster and faster until we really can't know what's going to happen, who we are, and who or what we might become. And that's pretty much how I was feeling in 2012. And as far as what I can tell from his writings, that's how Szilard was feeling in 1933. Now, Szilard also read science fiction. He loved H.G. Wells from a young age. Of course, today we think of Wells as one of the founding fathers of science fiction. He wrote The Time Machine, The War of the Worlds, The Invisible Man, The Island of Dr. Moreau. You could argue that modern science fiction as a genre started with Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which was a huge influence on Wells, but Wells kind of set down some of the principles that came to define the genre, like introducing just a single fantastical element and working out its consequences somewhat rigorously and keeping everything else quite realistic. And he also had this very sharp prose style, which was heavily inspired by another of his idols, Edgar Allan Poe. And later on, Wells kind of switched modes. So initially, he was very much a storyteller. That's the period when his most popular novels are from. But then he became very politically active, and he started using fiction as a vehicle to push his utopian socialist ideas, and also got involved in starting the League of Nations. And appropriately for this event, his core argument was this possibility of endless human progress. And in 1932, during this exile in England, Szilard read this novel called The World Set Free. And it's one of these later Wells utopian futurism novels, which he wrote in 1913. And it's not a memorable novel compared to his really great works, but it does contain a very far-sighted description of atomic energy. First, how that atomic energy transforms society and then brings about a final war that is fought with what Wells actually calls atomic bombs. Now, for Wells, this was a storytelling vehicle. He wanted to tell this story about this post-war utopia, but he was extremely well informed, so he based this atomic bomb concept on the work by early nuclear physicists like Lord Rutherford and Frederick Soddy, and names checks them in the novel. Now, Szilard seemed to initially just enjoy The World Set Free as fiction. He was very well aware of progress in nuclear physics. He'd sort of almost collaborated with Lise Meitner, who later discovered nuclear fission in Berlin. And if they had actually ended up working together, history might have looked very different, where maybe Nazi Germany would have gotten an atomic bomb much earlier. But in 1932, his interest in nuclear physics was more as a theoretical way to enable humanity to leave the solar system. But that was then, just in that moment, about to change. And a key moment was in September 1933. Lord Rutherford, one of the nuclear physics pioneers, gave a lecture at the British Association and summarized some of the recent work in nuclear physics. And Szilard had a cold, so he couldn't go, but he read about it in the Times the next day. In this article that mentions discoveries like the neutron, but included this line that really made Szilard angry. So Rutherford was quoted as saying that anyone who looked for a source of power in the transformation of the atoms is talking moonshine. And that somehow became a bee in Szilard's bonnet. He really, this kind of out of spite, he wanted to prove Rutherford wrong. And this was at this time when he really had nothing else to do. Like, he was living out of his hotel room, taking very long baths, taking long walks, and no academic obligations, no family, no distractions. So just thinking. And during one of his walks, something happened. And Richard Rhodes describes it wonderfully in The Making of the Atomic Bomb, his book about the Manhattan Project. And I'll read this brief extract from it to you. In London, where Southampton Row passes Russell Square, across from the British Museum in Bloomsbury, Leo Szilard waited irritably one grey depression morning for the stoplight to change. A trace of rain had fallen during the night. Tuesday, September the 12th, 1933, dawned cool, humid and dull. Drizzling rain would begin again in the early afternoon. When Szilard told the story later, he never mentioned his destination that morning. He may have had none, he often walked to think. In any case, another destination intervened. The stoplight changed to green. Szilard stepped off the curb. As he crossed the street, time cracked open before him, and he saw a way to the future, death into the world and all our woe, the shape of things to come. That was, of course, when Szilard in a flash realized that if an element splits by absorbing a neutron and emits two neutrons, you get this self-sustaining chain reaction that can liberate atomic energy. And we don't know exactly what sparked that insight, but I think it's pretty clear that it was not directly the world set free. Szilard was pretty deeply aware of all the research. He had also been thinking about biology and cellular division and exponential growth, and he had this creative facility for taking ideas from different fields and combining them. So, however, it's absolutely critical in what followed that he had read The World Set Free, because he himself describes that in that moment of insight, it was The World Set Free that flashed in his mind on how this world that Wells had described, all its both beautiful and terrible consequences, were about to become reality. So he had this clear mental model of all the implications of the chain reaction. And this completely transformed Szilard. So here's this person who had been this curious explorer, trying out many different things, never really following through with anything, not finding a purpose, who became completely obsessed and driven. He set out to make atomic energy real, to prevent atomic war and kickstart a new industrial revolution. And that's what he did throughout the entire 1930s. He filed patents, he tried to warn governments about bombs, and he pitched nuclear power to investors. And it's kind of interesting that he was sounding alarms and trying to raise money at the same time in the context of what today's AI companies are doing. But Szilard didn't have quite as much luck raising money. He wasn't exactly Sam Altman. But what was interesting is that when he pitched executives, he would give them pages from The World Set Free as essential reading. And finally, he actually dove into nuclear research himself. He convinced Lise Meitner in Berlin to run some experiments. By 1939, he ended up in New York and realized that uranium would be the element that could actually sustain a chain reaction. He borrowed money from friends for a quick proof of concept experiment. And then those data got Enrico Fermi to help him build the first nuclear pile. And then he convinced his old friend Einstein to write to Roosevelt, which then directly led to the Manhattan Project. And I'm not going to retell the full story of what happened next and Szilard's later efforts against nuclear proliferation. But what's kind of interesting here is this collision between a real-life discovery, the spark of discovery that Szilard made, and science fiction just completely transformed him and gave him this vision and energy to follow through and make the thing he had read about a reality. And next I want to say a little bit more about what exactly about The World Set Free might have made that possible. And in my view, there's three reasons that World Set Free had this impact on him, and also why science fiction in general can have this effect. There's characters, there's world building, and this deep marriage of science and story. First of all, The World Set Free had a character that Szilard almost certainly identified with very deeply. There's Holston, the scientist who invents how to liberate nuclear energy. And in a very uncanny coincidence, in the novel, Holston does this in Bloomsbury, where Szilard was living, in 1933. And that must have made it somehow more powerful for Szilard. And in one scene, Holston is walking around, having just made his discovery. He's walking through London, looking at people around him, going about their daily lives, and thinking to himself, like, I know something you don't. I know that the world is about to be completely transformed. And that could be describing Szilard himself. The relatable viewpoint like that is the key to the power of all fiction. And we don't see sci-fi worlds neutrally. We see them through characters that we identify with. So as we read, we become those characters. And for a while, the world they inhabit is our world. And as they change, we also change. But what sets science fiction apart from literary fiction or mainstream fiction or other genres is that the world itself changes. The world itself has its own character arc. And a good science fiction writer builds the world as carefully as they would any character. And Wells was a master on how to do this well. So in The World Set Free, he works out all the consequences of Holston's invention, how the world economy becomes disrupted by energy abundance, coal industries collapse, there's mass unemployment. There's also atomic-powered flight, these vertical takeoff, cheap atomic-powered airplanes transforming cities. He shows this through the eyes of a character whose industrial fortune is upended in this new world, and then social unrest escalates into this last war where atomic bombs are dropped on major cities that become radioactive ghost towns. And it's worth noting that it's not that Wells got everything right. Like his atomic bombs are actually almost hilariously different from real ones. So he gives quite specific descriptions of them as these like metal spheres with handles, with this like little bit of paper that you have to bite off to activate them, and then you throw them over the side of an atomic-powered airplane. And they also don't explode in one big bang, but they burn continuously for decades. But in this kind of almost Edgar Allan Poe-like style of his, he does convey the terror they evoke and the eerie feeling of the radioactive cities they leave behind that is quite reminiscent of what the actual reality of the effect of nuclear weapons was. And I think this is characteristic of all really good science fiction. It gets all the details wrong. Of course it gets all the details wrong. But by inhabiting the science fictional worlds, we get a little bit of the feel of what these future scenarios might feel like at a visceral level. And what The World Set Free captures is this period of technological free fall and the horrors of new war and the new world and what it's like to live through that. And that's why actually Wells introduces atomic energy in the first place. He's not that interested in nuclear physics, as well informed as he is, but he's trying to solve this storytelling problem. And this is a common pattern. So if you encounter a sticky sci-fi concept that you find really compelling, chances are the creator has introduced it to solve a storytelling problem. So sometimes even in the case of visual sci-fi for budget reasons, one example is how Gene Roddenberry came up with Star Trek's transporters because he didn't have the budget to show a shuttle landing in every episode. Just to share like a brief anecdote on a personal experience with that, by far the stickiest science fiction concept I ever created is this idea called Gevolot in The Quantum Thief, which is privacy settings, pervasive privacy settings for reality. And it's an idea that like a lot of cryptographers have written papers about, and there's a blockchain project named after it. But the only reason I came up with it originally was because I wanted to be able to tell a detective story set in the far future where the detective couldn't just Google the answer. Otherwise, there would have been no interesting conflict. So these things, the sticky sci-fi things do emerge sort of organically from this marriage between technology and story. But none of that is enough by itself. Even if you're engaged with these sci-fi concepts and primed, there needs to be this real-life idea that then makes them concrete and ignites them. Now, you could argue that all this is totally anecdotal, and of course you would be right. I've only given you this one example, but I'll continue a little bit with another example, which is my own. If we go back to Vernor Vinge for a bit, he is the closest thing I think we have to a modern H.G. Wells in terms of the magnitude of his influence. So starting in the early 80s, he wrote sci-fi classics which actually have quite a remarkable hit rate of successful predictions. So we have True Names from 1981, which still today reads like a cyberpunk thriller that envisions this anonymous internet. Fire Upon the Deep is all about explores what it might be like to live as a human or as an alien in a universe full of godlike intellects. And then we have Rainbow's End from 2006, which imagines a very rich world with augmented reality that now I think is about to hit its maximum relevance in just the next year or two. And there was like this amplifying effect to Vinge's influence by the fact that he was very active in the so-called extropian mailing list in the 90s, which, you know, if you spend any time in the AI or transhumanist circles, you will recognize all the names there. Anders, of course, is right here. Maybe there's others in the audience who hang out there. But it included people like Robin Hanson, Eliezer Yudkowsky, Nick Bostrom, Eric Drexler, and they kind of created this canon of modern thinking around AI safety and singularity. And I think especially through Eliezer Yudkowsky and Nick Boostrom, and that all those ideas got fed into the foundations of the big modern AI companies, as you know, at least Sam has directly acknowledged famously. So I think this is another example of sci-fi sparking very concrete and powerful real-time missions. And so it's almost like the Vinge. There's a generational Szilard moment with the collision of Vinge's writing with deep learning. So I lurked briefly on the extropian list, but I wasn't really fully singularity pilled. And what I became more interested in was the storytelling challenges that it posed. And that came about because I joined a writers group doing my PhD in Edinburgh, which included a writer called Charlie Stross, who has also written a fantastic novel about the singularity called Accelerando. Charlie kind of evokes the feeling of living through the singularity, but I was kind of interested in this question of how do we tell interesting stories in these radically post-human worlds, as a playground for imagination. And in 2012, in this kind of my period of metaphorical exile or confusion, I just finished writing the Quantum Thief trilogy, and my head was full of ideas about uploads and programmable matter. And that's when I got invited to an event at Autodesk, where I heard a talk on DNA origami. So this is a field of research where, based on the idea that DNA doesn't have to just encode information, it can actually be used as a construction material, and people have used it to design quite complex constructs, custom shapes, logic gates, like even what pretty much are like simple nanobots that can with actions that can be triggered by certain signals. And I found this just like staggeringly powerful, and had this Szillardian flash during the talk of like, if we can do this now, what could we do in a few years? This is going to get really weird, singularity weird. It's going to change what it means to be human, and there's patients like my mom whose lives could be changed. And I was really primed to go all in on a new field like this, coming out of my previous company. And so I ended up co-founding Helix Nano, my current company, originally around a specific DNA nanotechnology idea, which was how to build these intracellular ticker tapes to record what happens inside a cell. Didn't work. We couldn't make it work. Others now are building versions that do. And DNA nanotechnology as a field still remains kind of at the level of these very cool technology demos, but has not really translated into practical applications. Maybe it will one day. But I had that glimpse of a future with programmable biology, and that was enough to then keep building. mRNA turned out to be a much more viable way to reach some of the similar goals, and now, more than 10 years later, at Helix Nano, we made it to the clinic, have created some cool technologies that actually work in humans. But really, I'm still feeling the fire, the ignition of that original Szilard moment, and will probably spend the rest of my life doing some form of trying to realize that vision. And I kind of want to start concluding or wrapping up with the next obvious question, which is, do we have science fiction today that can catalyze the next Szilard moment, or have we already eaten all the vision seed corn? Vinge certainly still seems to be irrelevant. With every new AI advance, there's probably a Vinge spark, but of course, we don't know what the next really big idea is going to be. Is it already latent in some existing science fiction or not? And I feel that maybe in this moment in time, we don't just need the technical sparks. We also need new ideas about how to live with the technologies we've already built. We need these chain reactions also for ethics and economics and empathy and, I guess, notions of progress, which is, of course, what we're talking about here this weekend. And I think there's quite a large body of existing soft science fiction that already explores that, on how new technologies change society and identity and power structures. One writer who I think is massively underrated today is Ursula Le Guin. I feel her ideas could be fissile material for something big. She writes about utopian society and societies and their costs in books like The Dispossessed, or a very, very powerful short story I highly recommend called Those Who Walk Away from Almelas, and also about how we can relate to the other. I understand alien perspectives in books like The Left Hand with Darkness. I actually think it's a good time to go back to Mary Shelley and Frankenstein, because if you read Frankenstein carefully, it's not really about, it's not a cautionary tale in the sense that people often interpret it as. It's not about the hubris of creating life or how we shouldn't create new beings, but about, the warning really is that we need to be responsible parents and have empathy and care for the things, new beings that we create. Now, we might need just to refine more sci-fi uranium or mine more of it. Personally, for me, like the COVID pandemic was such a shock that I did find myself searching for better science fiction models for a biotech-centric future. I couldn't really find any good ones, so I tried to write one. This is the shameless plug part. My book called Darkome just came out in the UK. I think there's going to be a signing later this afternoon, which is about a world where everyone's immune systems can be digitally updated. What was kind of interesting about writing it was that it really helped me also clarify the technological roadmap of what we wanted to build at Helix Nano, and I ended up writing more about that in non-fiction form too. But the fiction actually came first and gave the starting point for the more rigorous plan. And I think there is a huge opportunity for scientists, engineers, economists, climate activists, people in all fields to do this kind of work, to write about possible worlds, to prepare others or even just yourself for these key moments of insight when they arrive. I'm actually very happy to see that this is happening at least amongst the AI researchers in the Bay Area. Shout outs to Richard Ngo and Joshua Akiam, who have written some very worthwhile stories. And I realized that writing for many people can be a high bar, but really I think doing this for yourself with no intent in publishing or sharing with others can still be powerful. And of course now we also have these LLM tools that can remove some of the pain from storytelling. And there are also other forms of collaborative world building that tap into the sense of play and imagination that really literally everyone has access to. A lot of people in the Bay Area, like my friend Randy Lubin or Jane McGonigal, are creating narrative games. Jane's book Imaginable has a great toolkit for very simple games you can try out for yourself. So this really does not have to be hard. And I think we have a growing responsibility to do it, to imagine new worlds. Because the mind that experiences the next big Szilard moment might not be human. Maybe it is a future synthetic mind that invents something that makes chain reactions seem small, but it still needs to have this storehouse of dreams that can be ignited by the discovery to give it meaning and to help it find its way to a better future for, with all of us. So let's make some good dreams. Thank you.